Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us as we continue our conversations with New York City mayoral candidates. As I think about sort of the milestone anniversary of Abney this year, I think about Abney's imprint on the city. And I think about not only all of our philanthropic endeavors, but the diverse group of city leaders who actually made them possible, right? That's what's important. And we are a city of different perspectives, and our organization is no different. Although I wasn't there when Abney was born in the 70s, I could just imagine when Lou Rudin convened the group of business leaders and civic leaders and labor leaders and political folks across the city all together so that we can come up with a plan to help New York City recover. And this diverse group had different interests, right? All these different interests were around the table, all with the same goal: to make New York City, the city that we love, not only climb out of that difficult time, but to do it in a way that helped all New Yorkers. And in this moment in time, so many of us are working to ensure that as we climb out the fiscal crisis this time, that the city's recovery is continued and its growth and it continues to happen will be inclusive. We work to make sure that it is equitable, and we're working to make sure that it is just. We all need to look forward to working with the leaders who can get us there, right? And that the thing that I love about Abney and its leadership, and Stephen talks about this all the time, is that we believe in the idea that those with a little more help those with a little less. And that's what makes Abney great. That's what makes this city great. And when I look at Abney members, right, we are true New Yorkers. And we are here to stay, and working together to find innovative solutions to the city's most pressing problems and issues is what we do. So we will recover from this crisis. We will do it with all New Yorkers in mind. And that's why it's important for us to continue as we foster a working relationship with city government, to provide mayoral candidates a platform to speak about what's important for them when we think about the future of New York. And it's important for us to bring this to the Abney audience and to engage and convene on key policy areas for the future. And that brings us here today. Today, we'll hear from mayoral candidate Sara Tirschwell. Although she grew up in South Texas, many might not know about her New York City roots. Her father and all of his siblings were born in Brooklyn, New York. She believes that the keys to revitalizing the economy will come from removing barriers to entry for small businesses, incentivize entrepreneurship to establish businesses that feed off our healthcare system and colleges and universities, and upgrade our infrastructure to create jobs and ease of movement around the city. Increasing mobility through the education is also one of her goals, because she talks about and she believes that education is the greatest lever, and talks about changing the current educational system by on-demand academic testing so parents can see how their children's progress is going, and expands gifted programs in more charter schools. She plans to address crime by developing solid partnerships between communities and police officers, and look at ways to continue the development of police resources with respected local neighborhood leaders. She believes that the next mayor of this city should have extensive experience in crisis management and large-scale solutions, but should also understand that the mayor's role is a fiduciary role of other people's money. And as we wrap up Women's History Month, we must acknowledge how Sara has bravely spoke out about her experience with sexual discrimination and continues to advocate for women in the male-dominant culture of high finance. And if you don't know and are interested in finding out where she will be on the June ballot, Sara Tirschwell is a Republican candidate running for the 2021 mayoral election. So with that, please join me in welcoming Sara Tirschwell. Sara, over to you.
Hi, Melva. Good morning. Thank you so much. I think I want to start by saying that I believe that Bill de Blasio may actually be the worst mayor of our lifetime. And I don't think that there's a lot of disagreement on that issue. Every time that we think that things can't get any worse, he proves us wrong. He consistently allocates resources to solve a problem, and the problem gets worse. We must start measuring compassion by outcomes and not merely by intention. We cannot afford another 4 years of policies like his. So, like you mentioned, I moved to New York in 1989 from Houston because even though Texas is bigger, New York is better. And when I moved here, 7 million other people had already figured it out. 30 years later, people are changing their mind. We must ask ourselves, why? I came to New York seeking opportunity after a childhood full of loss and at a time when the unemployment rate in Texas was over 9%, like it is in New York City today. I know what it's like to need a job, to want a job, and not be able to find one. I have overcome many challenges. Becoming a successful woman in finance was definitely a challenge and opened my eyes. When I started working in finance, yeah, it's true. Trading desks were kind of rowdy. But if you put your head down and worked and learned, it was a meritocracy. Today, like many industries where the pay is high, the path to getting a coveted job or promotion has become more complicated. And I know what it's like to be standing outside looking in. Raising 2 daughters on my own has been a challenge. I know what it's like to have an exhausting job and to come home and make excuses and to not have someone else to parent with and to wonder if you made the right decision for your child. But my struggle pales in comparison to the struggles that many New Yorkers are facing today in a post-COVID world. We feel it on our streets and our subways, where we are worried for our lives for the first time in a generation. We see it in our communities where poor planning, heavy-handed regulation, and decades of neglect has led to blighted, segregated neighborhoods and unaffordable costs of living. We see it in lower income neighborhoods where regulatory roadblocks and the disparate delivery of critical services like education have blocked the chance to advance. We know it when we discover the literal poisoning of children by lead in housing projects, which Bill de Blasio again said wasn't his fault. Think the system is broken? So do I. I spent my entire career in the specialized field of distress finance, which is investing in troubled situations like New York today. I honed my skills by becoming an expert in understanding root causes of distress. And the buck, really the dollar, stopped with me. And speaking of dollars, our city is facing an enormous financial crisis. The next mayor will have to solve a fiscal crisis on top of dealing with a system that no longer works for the people of the city of New York. But within a crisis lies opportunity. And New York City needs a mayor who is laser focused on turning this crisis into an opportunity to fundamentally change the way that New York City does business and treats our residents. And why am I raising my hand? Because everything that is happening in New York City is destructive to everything I care about, everything you care about, everything we care about. We need better schools and safer streets. We need to lower costs for households and businesses. We need to foster a real middle class. We need more opportunity and less government run by people like Bill de Blasio. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. We've got questions. You talked about the root causes of distress, and you mentioned specifically after that we need better schools and safer streets. I'd like to dig in a little bit on that. So can you talk about how you would apply that vision of attacking root causes of distress and how you would, let's start with how you would improve our education system?
Well, I think that a couple of things. So Bill de Blasio has spent most of his administration talking about the disparity, the lack of diversity in the 8 specialized high schools in New York City, for instance, and is trying to take away the SAT, which is the entrance exam for these specialized high schools, which of course was designed, I believe, back in the 1970s as a meritocracy, so that kids from any kind of household could earn their way into these elite high schools. But what he's ignored that there are another, call it 50 to 80 top high schools in New York City that we should actually be expending more resources on, because the outcomes there are almost as good as these 8 specialized high schools. But instead, the focus has been specifically on these 8 specialized high schools. And I don't believe that we should be taking away the meritocracy that we have in our school system that allows for opportunity for kids from low-income households to get there. And I think it's a complete cop-out, because what we're basically saying is that we can't possibly educate children from kindergarten through 8th grade so that they are prepared to take this test in 8th grade. And so I also believe that we need to direct a lot more resources to reforming education in K through 8. And instead of lowering standards for students, we need to be raising academic standards for students and reforming curriculum, especially when it comes to math. Math, it's been proven, if the more resources you devote to math, the higher your sort of, return on investments. And I do think that we need to expand choice. I think we need to expand choice by basically having the next mayor work with the state legislature to increase the number of charters so that we have access to more charter schools. And I think that we need to create what I call mini schools, which are schools that are more teacher and principal run, so that they're addressing very specific talents that kids have, because we know that kids have different talents, right? Some kids are more creative, some kids have more science brains, some kids are more mathematically oriented, and we need to increase latitude and accountability for teachers and students in creating these sorts of mini schools, which have also been proven to have a good return on investment.
Can you talk about also the same as it relates to safer streets and how you would look at public safety?
So I think that public safety is complicated, because one of the things that we know is that crime fills voids. And I don't think you can solve the problems of public safety without also solving the problems of our economy. And at this point, in a post-COVID world, we have voids in the economy and we have voids in people's lives. And we have to think about that and understand that these things are inextricably linked. But I do believe that there is a high level of polarization between communities and the police. And it's the very communities that have the highest rates of crime that have the highest degrees of polarization. And we need to work on that. And so we need to engage with the New York Police Department for a more effective community policing strategy. We have the NCO program, we have the Build the Block program. The community thinks, the communities think some of these programs work well. The NYPD thinks different programs work well. We need to figure out what works well for both sides and reduce tensions between the police and the community. I also think that we need to focus on, again, what are the root causes of the higher levels of crime, aside from the voids in the economy and voids in people's lives. It's drugs, it's gangs, and it's illegal firearms. So that tells me that we have to develop an effective policing strategy to attack those specific issues. And that, again, the police need to work with the communities that they serve to solve these problems. And these are problems that I believe require some proactive policing strategies that, and like the crime deterrence unit, for instance, that this administration abolished. I think we need a crime deterrence unit because those problems are problems that cry out for a crime deterrence unit. I just want to make sure, I'm sorry, I'm looking down because I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Oh, I also think we need to think about mental health on the police force. And I think we need to think about the trauma that the police who have, if somebody points a gun at you, right, as an average citizen, you're going to have some, I don't know, PTSD from that. And I think the police are no different than us. And I think that we may need to make sure that we are also proactively dealing with that. Maybe we need, annual mental health exams for our police force. Maybe we also need to think about hiring more college-educated police officers, because we know that there is a lower rate of abuse of power amongst college-educated police officers. We have the data that shows us that.
Can I ask just a little deeper? You said at the start that there are voids in the economy and in people's lives. So that would point to, but most of what you talked about was policing. I would think that talking about voids in the economy and voids in people's lives would function more about, and root causes, that you look to ameliorate people's either economic situation or personal situation. So I would like to dig a little bit on that if I understand you correctly. Do you see opportunity as key, or do you in a focus here for a safer, more prosperous city?
I see opportunity. Yes, absolutely. I see opportunity as key, but we do have to solve the public safety problem, kind of some of that first, right? We need more police presence clearly on subways because people have to get to and from work. People have to have mobility to have opportunity. And we know that a higher police presence has an inverse correlation with crime. So that's critically important. So I just want to say that we need to make sure that we have a high police presence in areas where there are high rates of crime. But yes, we have an opportunity problem in New York City, and we have for a while. We have stagnant socioeconomic mobility. And I would say that some of the root causes of that are education, which we've talked about a little bit, but it's also small businesses, because you have to think about what are the access points for people to change their socioeconomic status. It's education, and it's also small business. And we have made the route to starting and operating a small business really difficult. We have placed so many obstacles in the way of somebody starting a small business by creating this, regulatory labyrinth. I would appoint a deputy mayor of small business and utilize, there's a department of, I believe it's called the Department of Small Business Services, which I think is actually kind of funny because
Great Greg Bishop, who is a proud Avenue board member, new Avenue board member, led that.
Yes, first of all, I think it's terrific that we have that department, but it's funny that part of the purpose of that department is to help small businesses get around the very regulations that we put in their way. So so I think we have to figure out a way to make it easier and facilitate the process for starting a small business in New York City. And you go to other cities and they roll out the red carpet, right? They basically say, hey, you need help turning on your electric. We're going to help you. We're going to help you do that. We're going to help you do that quickly and efficiently. And we're not going to have 5 different agencies with oversight for making sure that you're running your business properly. We're going to have one. You're just going to have to interface with one. And instead of having 5 different people show up and fine you and make it difficult for you to operate your business, we're gonna have one. You're gonna deal with one, and we're gonna simplify your life. And right now, New York is, I believe, number 80 of 81 cities across America for the ease of starting a business and doing a business. My objective would be to get New York City in the top 10.
Thank you. By the way, do you know who's worse than us? Who's 81?
It's funny. I don't actually. That's actually a really good question. I don't know. But there is one who's worse than us. My guess is maybe it's Chicago, but I don't know. Maybe San Francisco. Can't tell you.
Can you talk about what you would do to combat the rising number of homeless in the city, and how you would help that population?
Well, again, homelessness is sort of inextricably linked with the economy, right? To a certain extent. There's a large number of homeless people who are suffering from mental illness and from chemical addiction. And I think we need to make sure that the homeless are, that category of homeless are in supervised facilities where they're getting the treatment that they actually need. And I don't think it is compassionate to have homeless people living and sleeping on the streets of New York City. I believe that they should not be allowed to live on the streets of New York City, and should be in facilities, like I said, where either they're getting the treatment that they need or getting the roof over their head that they need. We've increased our spending on homelessness, I believe, to about $3.2 billion, which is about double what it was 10 years ago. And we've seen, actually, this is a perfect example of a problem where we've allocated more resources and the problem's only gotten worse. So I think we need to rethink how we deal with homelessness. And I think we also need to think about the people who need a roof over their head because they lost their job, they're down on their luck, whatever this situation is that caused them to be just homeless without mental illness or chemical addiction as an ancillary problem. I think we need to think about investing in those people and doing a better job of investing in those people, and think about the money that we allocate towards that category of homelessness as bridge capital. And how do we bridge these people from homelessness to a point of self-sufficiency with clearly, clear markers along the way? Maybe you go from, the city completely subsidizing where they live to partially subsidizing where they live to no longer subsidizing their housing situation, because we've provided enough transitional services for them. And we've also created an economy, fostered an economy that is vibrant, and that offers a wide range of jobs and job opportunities for everyone.
In terms of, could we talk about kind of what's next in your in your opinion, as you look out to growth, what you see as whether it's technology or other industries, what are the industries that you would focus on to see us grow and maintain our position as a globally competitive economic and business hub?
So what Melva said at the beginning about some of the things I've said is absolutely true. I think we need to leverage some of our existing competitive strengths. So we have a world-class healthcare system. We have some of the finest hospitals in the world. And so that tells me that what we ought to be doing is we ought to be leveraging that in the field of healthcare technology. We've got telehealth. We have all kinds of apps that are being developed to solve issues where you can use cognitive behavioral therapy for people who exhibit signs of suicidality, of depression. We should be encouraging healthcare technology to relocate here. I think that that's really important. I also think that we have a lot of local ethnic and craft industries that, maybe we ought to be a little bit protectionist about and help create a real space for those. I mean, we have local beer, local cheese industries. We should definitely be helping those entrepreneurs start more businesses like that. We should be leveraging our world-class universities. We should be leveraging our port. We have the biggest natural harbor in the United States. We have a very busy port, but our port has become less competitive because of the regulatory roadblocks that New York and New Jersey have placed in the way of doing business. And we have to rethink, how do we make it easier to do business in New York City?
Can I ask, you've been in the private sector, you've been in the public sector. You've never run for office, you've never held office. What happened in your, it's not like you woke up one day, obviously you're not a fan of the mayor, and you're like, I got to do this, or did lightning strike? What brings you to this moment?
Oh my God, lots of things. When I was a kid, my parents used to talk to me about the Holocaust and how it was really important not to just follow orders and to stand up and fight and speak out. And for as long as I can remember, I've spoken out. I write letters. If anybody wants to look at my LinkedIn profile, I wrote a letter to Governor Cuomo back in April, which he didn't respond to, which I was really actually upset about, which is why I posted it on LinkedIn. For LinkedIn, it kind of went viral. It had, I believe, something like 12,000 people read it, which, like I said, for LinkedIn is huge. And I think that sort of support from the community that, hey, what you're saying is actually important and needs to be heard, gave me the confidence that if I raised my hand and said, hey, I'm ready to take this job on, that the voters of New York City would respond to that. And I think that one of the things that I keep reading on social media is everybody says that the Democratic candidates are all, different shades of the same story. And I think that what I'm talking about is a little bit different than what they're talking about. I'm talking about what are the fundamental things that are wrong with New York City. I'm angry about the same thing that everybody else in New York City is angry about. There has been a massive consolidation of wealth and power at the top of our society that that has not left much of an opening for anybody else. And we have to solve that. And we have a city that depends on the top 1% to 2% for 50% of our taxes. And we've just learned that 1% to 2% is very mobile and maybe a little bit fickle. And so that should just mathematically tell us that the path that we're on is not a good path and that we need to broaden our tax base. Well, how are we going to broaden our tax base? We're going to broaden our tax base by offering opportunity, because we have to get people from a point of not being able to take care of themselves to a point of being able to take care of themselves, because people want jobs, people want opportunity, but it has to be here. And we have to offer that to them. And we have a regulatory regime that's become oppressive in New York City. And it favors the haves versus the have-nots. Because if you are a big company and you have to get licenses and approvals and permits to start a business or to operate your business, you can afford lawyers, you can afford facilitators to get you where you need to be. But that shouldn't be the path to opportunity. You should be able to have an idea and be able to put that into action and have the city where you live help you do that. And New York City doesn't do that. And it's this, and we've gotten to a point where we have very unaffordable costs of living. And we have to rethink, sort of why do we have unaffordable costs of living? Well, because we've given tax abatements to build luxury housing. So now we have a huge surplus of luxury housing in this city and not enough affordable housing. And then we've left NYCHA to kind of rot. And I'm sorry, we have lead contamination problems at NYCHA. And on top of that, you have 170,000 apartment units in NYCHA that are pretty run down. And what every parent knows is if you treat somebody like they don't matter, they start to feel like they don't matter. And so what are we telling residents of NYCHA housing? We're telling them that we think they don't matter. That's not okay. So we have to rethink the way that we treat the residents of New York City and the paths to opportunity that we can and should be providing.
So there are two things I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into. First, you said, I'm ready to take this job on. So it is a big thing to run a city, and especially the greatest city in the world. One, how are you ready, as a manager? And two, have you thought about this is my first deputy mayor, this would be my police commissioner? And if so, can you tell us who those people are?
Okay, so first of all, it is absolutely a daunting task, and anybody who tells you otherwise is not being honest with themselves. It is a daunting task. I do believe that I'm ready to take this on. I have spent the last 31 or 32 years focused on large, complex situations in crisis as a fiduciary for other people's money. And that is literally the job description of the next mayor of New York City. I have thought about who I would appoint as my deputy mayor for very specific roles. I am not ready to reveal their names at this point because I have not finalized that in my mind. And I also have not spoken to some of them about it. So I think that they would be actually shocked to watch this and go, oh my God, I didn't even know she was thinking about me for that. But I've specifically thought about small business, about education, and about public safety as those are the main categories that I've been thinking about.
The second thing you said I wanted to dig into a bit was you said there's not enough affordable housing. How would you get more affordable housing built?
Okay, I want to make sure that I don't miss what I wanted to say about that. I think that hang on just a second. I'm just looking for my notes. No, I can't find them. Anyway, so what would I do on affordable housing? I think that we have to think about why it is that there is a lack of affordable housing in New York City. Every other large city in America who doesn't have an oppressive regulatory regime has affordable housing. So that tells me that that is the first place that we need to look. So what is it about our regulatory regime that sort of gets in the way of affordable housing? Well, I would start with zoning. There are, I think, lots of areas of New York City that could be rezoned. There are also lots of rules as part of our zoning, that could probably be lifted, like the onerous requirement that you have enough parking in order to build something. That to me is nonsensical in the 21st century. And so I think that there are some outdated and arcane requirements that we need to revisit. Frankly, I think that it's something that we ought to think of wholesale when we think of implementing laws in the future, which is we should have sunset clauses that kind of force us to go back and review our rules. You know, we have 6,000 rules and regulations for small businesses, for instance. You can't tell me that all 6,000 of those rules are applicable today. So I think it's the same thing for affordable housing. We need to think about what are the rules and regulations that are getting in the way of that and remove them, and stop taking the taxpayers' money to subsidize the building of affordable housing, and try to foster private development, which is really where the building of affordable housing ought to start. And think about making sure that there is a profit incentive, and stop trying to control the profit incentive, because without a profit incentive, nobody's going to build affordable housing. There has to be a profit incentive. But I think, again, trying to control it and saying, okay, 20% of, everything that you build has to be affordable. I don't think that makes sense, because again, then you get a surplus again of luxury housing, because 80% of that ends up being luxury housing. We don't need any more luxury housing. We need affordable housing, and we need to pave the way for that.
Can I ask a markets question about that? Is if so we struggle with affordable. San Francisco struggles with affordable.
Yeah.
Same could be said in London. Same could be said in most of the popular global centers that are basically controlled by market, right? For the most part. I mean, is it not the market that in many ways determines just the cost level, number one, and then number two, that seems to make an argument for just density, right? Build as much as humanly possible, to borrow something in fairness the mayor has really wanted to do, but has not quite happened at the scale, which I think works. And so I guess, are we sort of stuck with this in some ways as a function of our popularity, as a place people from all over the world want to come and live? Like, it's structural.
No, I don't think it's structural in the sense of our regulatory regime, which has to get out of the way. That's why I believe it's structural. And we built, again, I'm going to go back to the surplus of luxury housing, because you just said people all over the world want to be here. Well, we built all this luxury housing, and partly because government, again, our government offered tax abatements to build luxury housing. And guess what? We built it for people all over the world to have a foothold in New York City, and the people did not come. So I actually don't think that the reason that we don't have affordable housing is a market-based problem. I think we're not allowing the market to function.
All right, I've got one last question for you. Who do you admire politically? Like, who do you model yourself on as, or hope to model yourself on if elected?
Oh, well, I think that one of my political heroes in New York City history is Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. I am short like him, but have a lot of energy and a lot of fire to solve problems. I think that on a national scale, my favorite president was Teddy Roosevelt, and for some of the same reasons. But I envisioned both those people, both those figures were men of the people, and I view myself as a woman of the people. I'm not establishment. I have been sort of fighting the establishment my entire life, and I want to make sure that we take down the barriers that government puts up and that we let the people in.
Sara, thank you. We believe in strong two-party system. We believe in a public airing of the issues. We're grateful to hear from you, and we hope that we will hear from you again. So thank you for telling us about your platform, and thanks for talking to us and answering our questions.
Thank you. New York City does need a real choice in November. Thank you.
My pleasure.